This is the disclaimer for Wildlife Control Consultant and Pest Geek Podcast for the Living the Wildlife podcast. Always follow national, state, provincial, and local laws when using pesticides and or other control methods to manage pests. Wildlife Control Consultant, LLC, Pest Geek Podcast, Living the Wildlife Podcast, Stephen M. Vantassel, or their or his affiliates are not responsible for followers' use of the information provided here. Hi everyone, Stephen Vantassel here, Wildlife Control Consultant, bringing you another episode of Living the Wildlife as part of the Pest Geek Podcast family. Hey, thanks for coming along, and I hope you've had a great week. I'm recording actually a little early this week, so I'm trying to get some things. Had some health issues in the family, so boy, it's amazing how health issues can certainly consume a lot of time. So definitely take care of yourself out there and be safe. Well, I've had the opportunity this past week to attend the 2022, I think it's called the International Feral Pig Conference or Feral Hog Conference. I mean, I always get those terms. I mean, same animal, but different terms. So it's been a webinar by leading researchers within the area of feral hogs. We don't have feral hogs in Montana, thank God, but we're certainly trying to prepare for that possibility because there are a boatload of feral hogs north of us in Saskatchewan and Manitoba and Alberta. And so some of those provinces border the state of Montana. So some of us here in the northern tier of the United States are certainly eyeballing what can happen up there, and we're certainly trying to prepare ourselves for the eventuality that feral pigs are probably going to make their way. North Dakota, I believe, is actually at greater risk than we are, but nevertheless, feral pigs can cross the border, and that's certainly a concern because they're invasive species, of course, a host of diseases that they can carry, not to mention diseases aside, just the devastation they can do to the environment, predating on our natural fauna and flora, that's wildlife and plant life, and the damage that they can do, because they will go around and just eat up goslings of geese and, ducks and eggs and tear up the soil and cause erosion issues and water fouling. Again, even aside from many types of disease, and then of course the damage that they can do to cropland as well. So it's serious, and we're taking it seriously. But those of you in the southern tier of the United States, I believe feral hogs are in 38 states, perhaps 30. I guess it depends on, there has been some eradication efforts that have been occurring. But nevertheless, I've been attending this particular conference, and one of the things, of course, that intrigued me was discussions about, is there a better bait than corn? And my hope is to get one of the speakers to come on the show and do an interview about some of the research that they've done more recently, testing some various baits using a choice system. It's really kind of a clever analysis that they did, so I'm hoping to get him on board. So I'm not going to talk about his presentation right now. I'm going to hold that off, but I wanted to talk a little bit about what the state of knowledge is right now regarding baiting of feral pigs, because as many of you know, trapping really is one of the primary means of managing this invasive species. And the reason for this is the ability and the potential, of course, of capturing the whole sounder. That is the whole family and extended family group, so that you're not, we're shooting, unless you're careful, you can actually disperse the feral pigs farther if you're shooting. Now, it doesn't mean shooting isn't a viable means, but it means that shooting has its own risks in spreading and causing the dispersal of these feral pig units. Whereas trapping, if you're doing it right, you can capture the entire sounder and really take that unit off the landscape. And so this is some important material. So how do we do this? How do we get the best bait? Of course, many of you already know corn is a primary bait for baiting feral hogs. But is there anything better? And that's really the question. And is there
at times other options available to you that you should be considering. So let me take you to a publication that you can get online at no additional cost. Many of you have heard, if you've been listening to the podcast, you know I hate the word free when it comes from the government, because nothing the government does is free. You're just not having to pay for it again. So this would certainly be one of those publications that falls in that category. It's not a government publication. It is a university publication, but many universities, or especially your land-grant universities, are getting funding from various tax-based sources. And so as part of their mission is that they take research-based information and package it in a manner that's receivable by people that are non-academics. In other words, they're taking the information from the academic world, the research world, and trying to distill it down to the fundamental principles and concepts and recommendations so that it's actually usable, rather than getting really involved into statistical analysis and very highly nuanced. In other words, a producer or a wildlife control operator just wants to know, what should I do to catch X? How do I resolve this conflict with this particular animal? And this is one of those publications. For those of you who are just listening and not able to watch the video, let me read this title for you, and gives you an opportunity to perhaps look it up at another time. And the document is called Reducing Non-Target Species Interference While Trapping Wild Pigs. Now, that's a very specific publication. So again, because one of the challenges of using corn is that a lot of animals are attracted to eating corn, and that includes non-targets that you don't want to catch in your traps. They have a picture here of a dog. They have pictures here of birds. I think those are probably grackles, raccoons, and then of course deer. And so capturing or having these other organisms in your trap is just going to consume bait, and then you're going to have to deal with releasing them, and then there's always the potential of injury to these species. And so if you just want to catch pigs, then how do we catch pigs without attracting all of these other animals? And that's what this particular publication is all about, to try to give you the best information available at the time of publication. And this was published in September of 2015 by Texas A&M University, and the document number is WF, that's F as in Frank, so Wildlife Frank -030, so WF-030. And again, this is available online from agrilife.org, Texas Wildlife Services. And so if you just do a search on Reducing Non-Target Species Interference While Trapping Wild Pigs, you'll get this publication coming up. And I'll probably try to get a link put into the description area to help you find it as well. And again, it is published by Texas A&M University in their AgriLife Extension program. I don't see authors here straight away, so it must have been a group exercise. So let me see if I can find a particular author. This publication. Oh, here we go. Here are the authors. My apologies. Right here at the end. And the authors of this publication are Josh Helkel. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that correctly. That's Josh, Helcel, Josh Helsel. He's an extension associate at Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service. The second author is Mark Tyson, spelled like Tyson chicken, James Cash, like Johnny Cash, and then Dr. James C. Cathy, Kathey. And again, all of them are associated with Texas A&M Extension Service and that portion of the university. If you're not familiar with extension services, some of us up in the northeast part of the country, extension's really dropped off. But extension is basically the part of a university that takes research-based information, packages it for public consumption. It's the way that the university tries to reach out and make its information available to the general public. Typically agriculture, but oftentimes extension is now moving into areas of helping people live better in the city and having small gardens and how to deal with pest control and those types of things. So it's really some tremendous resources that can be available, and I think this publication is certainly one of them. So just a reminder of what the title is again: Reducing Non-Target Species Interference While Trapping Wild Pigs. So the publication, I'm going to try to summarize it here. I'm not going to read it word for word to be sure, but I'm trying to summarize it. So basically, the publication begins, of course, setting the stage, talking about the devastation caused by feral hogs relatively quickly. Then it moves right into how wild pigs are removed. And again, wild pig, feral pig, these are non-native species on the landscape, and they've been in America since 1500s, been introduced by the Spanish, but they've really only become a really significant issue probably within the last 40 years, or probably 30 years might be a better way of phrasing it. It's in the late 90s that things really started getting out of hand. And part of that was due to agricultural changes practices and just the dispersal of these animals. And so whatever the case may be, feral hogs are a serious issue and we need to address it. So this publication talks about how do we attract pigs into our traps while keeping other species away from our traps. And so its first principle, of course, and this is something that any wildlife control operator intuitively knows, and that is location, location, location. And that is the number one issue to try to reduce non-target capture in any trap, is positioning your trap in a manner that's targeting the species you want to capture. So placing your feral pig trap where feral pigs are and making it convenient for them to get to obviously is key to reducing non-target capture or interference with your particular traps. And so they talk about the importance of using trail cameras, looking for sign, looking for damage, looking for trails, looking for scat to try to find these high activity areas. But, again, the challenge with wildlife control operators is we don't always have that opportunity, because if you're hired by a client, they may be suffering feral pig damage, but that may not be the best site by which to capture those feral pigs. You really want to get closer to their main, the core area of where they're living. So rather than maybe they're just living in the neighbor's area, sleeping there overnight, and then traveling over to feed in the property that you've been hired at. But again, to the extent possible, you need to make sure those traps are placed on high traffic areas where the feral pigs are. And that would require you to be sure you're using trail cameras and looking for sign and evidence and really drilling down. So you may need to spend more time choosing a proper site before you get the trap out. And that's sometimes counterintuitive for those of us in wildlife control where we're wanting to get a trap out there and start working right away, where when we're dealing with feral hogs, you may need to take some extra time and make sure you're charging for this. That, yeah, you want to trust the client's information, but you know that maybe the client's not out there in the middle of the night looking where the feral pigs are. And so you want to take their information, but you want to make sure you ground truth it to be sure that what the client is saying is really the best locations of where you're going to be putting your equipment. So the publication goes on and then moves to the second issue, and that is, what is the best bait? So you have your location chosen, you know that's a high activity area. How should you bait your trap? And so now the debate begins. What is the best bait? The challenge with feral hogs is they're omnivores. And they're opportunistic omnivores, okay? I don't know of an omnivore who isn't opportunistic, but I think they mean that by saying pigs eat what's available, that they don't target certain things more than others. They're just sort of, if it's around, they're going to grab it. Maybe that's probably what that means. But feral pigs are certainly omnivores, and they consume a wide variety of foods. Here's an example. I'll give you a little bit of a list here from this publication. This comes from page 3, column 2. And they say that they consume grasses and forbs. Forbs are more woody stemmed type plants that have that are flowering, woody browse, roots, tubers, corn, grain, cactus, hard mast, that's things like nuts and seeds of woody plants like acorns, soft mast such as berries and fruits, invertebrates, things like arthropods, which are like insects and mollusks, and worms, for example, and small vertebrates such as frogs, birds, and then detritus, which they're referring to also as carrion, as dead animal flesh, and even animal feces. Well, that's a pretty broad amount of foods that this particular animal can eat. And so that can be both a blessing and a curse, because how do you know what's going to be the best bait? And especially if you have a lot of competing food sources, it may be hard to attract those feral pigs into a trap if there's plenty of alternative food around, particularly if the alternative food is palatable. And so this is part of the challenge of dealing with feral pigs. And so there is some research that suggests that feral pigs are easier to trap in the fall. So think about your timing. And that makes sense because there's less food sources in the cooler periods of the year. So fall, probably winter as well, would make them easier to trap simply because there's less food sources available. So what the researchers are doing is some of them have tested at this particular time. Again, this is 2015. There is more research since, and I'm hoping to get that person on board to talk in our podcast here soon. But just to lay the groundwork for what's been done so far is that 46 different attractants have been tested for preference by wild pigs. And only one was found to be significantly to reduce bait consumption by non-target species. Now think about that for a moment. So the researchers looked at 46 different attractants, and only one was found to be less attractive to non-pigs. Wow. Well, that's not very positive, but what is it? So among these attractants, a particular strawberry flavored additive increased wild pig site visitation and consumption. So visitation's important, as well as you want the pigs to be eating it, right? So visitation is a clue on how attractive a bait is, as well as consumption. And it reduced non-target visitation and consumption. So this particular strawberry flavored additive was sort of the golden bait, the golden lure that increased attractiveness to feral pigs while decreasing attractiveness to non-target animals. That's like the holy grail for trapping, right? If you can find a bait, let me put this in other terms, if you can find a bait that's attractive to raccoons and not attractive to everything else, well, that's a win, right? That doesn't get any better, because then you can use that particular bait on jobs where the client's hiring you to control raccoons, right? So this is basically pretty big. And so what were some of the other products, just to kind of give you an idea of what was tested, so you get a sense of what the researchers looked at. And it's a very long list, again, 46 materials. And so bear with me here as I read these off for you. Acorn scent, anise oil, applesauce, apricot nectar, blood meal, boar mate, which is a trademarked product, boiled wheat, Chinese yams, coal, as in COAL, the stuff we burn, coal, cod liver oil, coffee beans, corn mash, creosote, fish oil, milk that's been spoiled, molasses, motor oil, new motor oil used, peppermint oil, pine scent, pine sol, that's the cleaning agent, snake feces, snake scent, soybean oil, strawberry flavoring, sweet potatoes, tofu that's been spoiled, truffles, truffles are various types of mushrooms, violet scent, which is imitation, by the way, and then walnut extract. Other researchers tested creosote, fish stock, meat meal, molasses, and vanilla. Other researchers researched anise, apple, banana, berry, a product called Boar Mate, Boarmate. That's a trademarked product. Bubblegum, butterscotch, caramel, cheese, a product called Pig Frenzy, which is trademarked, and strawberry. So again, only the one that had a strawberry flavoring was sort of the holy grail. But the authors go further and say, we can't just simply rely on the bait. You also must employ baiting strategies. So they pointed out that how most baits are scattered on the ground, leaving them accessible for almost any species to find. But what they found was that if you used other baiting strategies for feral pigs, you could reduce attractiveness to non-target animals. One of those things was called a pig pipe, which consists of a 6-inch by 4-foot Schedule 40 PVC pipe fitted with threaded coupling and removable cap on one end, to which a rotating eye bolt is attached. Holes would be made slightly larger than a kernel of corn that allows the corn to fall out, but the pipe would need to be rolled in order for the bait to fall out. What they pointed out is that many non-target animals won't put the effort in to do this type of work, where a pig actually will. Many non-targets, they pointed out, may initially use their sense of sight to detect bait meant for wild pigs, and so they suggested placing a 3/4 inch sheet of plywood coverboard over a bait pile impairs visual detection and restricts physical access to the bait. That's kind of a clever particular tech. They also looked at things such as deterrents and repellents used in baits. One of them that people use, of course, is diesel fuel that's poured on corn. And they pointed out that the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service does not recommend using diesel fuel on corn or any other bait when trapping wild pigs. And they pointed out that diesel fuel can contaminate water and damage habitat and wildlife. And so they want us to do things, of course, in a responsible way. No wildlife control operator should ever be using diesel. This is very dangerous, and I doubt your liability insurance is going to protect you from doing something as dangerous as using diesel fuel with your corn. They pointed out that your trap choice also is important. And we talked in a previous podcast using the pig brig and how the pig brig as a trap design helped reduce non-target animal entry into the bait area. And so again, but there are a lot of, some of you may already have some feral pig traps and aren't looking necessarily to stop using those devices. And I don't think you should. I mean, you want to use a variety of tools. And so they talked about how different types of traps prevent other non-target animals or reduce the attractiveness of non-targets to certain types of positions. And so some of this gets a little technical, so I'm going to simply hold off on some of that and refer you back to this particular product, because I think it's going to be a little hard to discuss some of that. However, they do mention, the role of remotely triggered gates. And obviously, that is a beautiful way of reducing non-target capture, because you're seeing things on a cell phone. For those of you in cell phone service, some of you are obviously going to be trapping maybe in areas that are so remote that may not be an option. But again, cellular service is extending even out here in Montana. We're getting cellular service in a lot of places we didn't have it before. But of course, we have also a lot of federal land where there's never going to be a cell phone tower. So there's obviously going to be limits on that. But then you can get into some satellite work as well that can overcome the cellular problem. But nevertheless, many of you are going to be working in more urbanized areas, suburban areas, and so cellular service is strong and capable. And so you're able to actually take a picture or look at live at the feral pigs inside of the trap before you even trigger the gate. And so you can confirm saying, that's just a deer in there, and I'm not going to close the gate. I'm going to wait for the deer to leave. Or, hey, I've got a bunch of feral hogs in there. I'm going to hit the trap door and capture that sounder. So those are obviously very important techniques to reduce non-target capture in your traps. They talk about push-through trap designs because, again, adult pigs like to root and they'll push through things. It's going to be hard, of course, for the juveniles to get in some of those traps, but nevertheless, those are another option for you to reduce some of that non-target capture. They point out a particular trap technique here, actually the triggering, not a trap, but a triggering technique called the bucket trigger, which they said helps reduce bait consumption and trap activation by juvenile wild pigs and non-target species. And so what they have is a 5-gallon bucket raised on some blocks, so it's higher off the ground, and then attached to a pole. So the idea is that an adult pig has to be the one that pushes that container over where the juveniles won't have the strength or the height necessary to tip that over to trigger the door, as a way of reducing the ability of other animals' access, or certainly your smaller pigs from getting, because we want to catch those mature pigs because they're much harder to kill by other predators. They pointed out using a rooter stick is more likely to be activated by adult wild pigs instead of the juveniles. And then they talked about things such as animal activated triggers, such as this tire trigger, which depends on wild pig rooting behavior. So those are some other baiting methods that can be used as well. So this publication, I think, was rather interesting in terms of how they were helping wildlife control operators, the general public. It's written for people that are producers primarily, but helping them understand how to reduce non-target activity at their traps to make their traps more targeted for wild pigs, so that we're not wasting time catching animals we're not interested in or feeding animals we're not interested in. Now, some of you may be thinking, Stephen, I'd like to have a little more information about this strawberry bait. Well, let me see if I can get a little bit more on that in terms of this particular bait or odor, I guess, for lack of a better term. Before I do that, let me give you one other idea. They did suggest with corn that you can sour it by fermenting it to make it less palatable to other species. And the way you do this by souring it is that you basically take the desired amount of corn, place it in the container, then you add water to cover the bait by 1 inch or 2. Then the mixture ferments on its own if you give it enough time and it's in enough heat. Covering the mixture, adding yeast or milk or beer accelerates the fermenting process, particularly when the container is placed in direct sunlight. It could take several days depending on temperature, but once it begins to bubble and give off a strong, pungent, and even slightly sweet odor, then you know that it's ready. Now, we talked about how they're already omnivores, and they referred to this alternative strawberry or berry flavors containing other chemical compounds may produce different responses from both wild pigs and non-target species. So my suggestion is that you play around with some strawberry flavors and maybe add that to your corn, maybe put it in a little side area and do some testing on it to see how this could work for you, to see if this is something that could be helpful for your particular trapping use. And let me see if I can find this other section here that talked about the particular odors. Because I missed where it was. This document's a little. Okay, here it is. So what the researchers thought was that the unique combination of furanones. Now that's a term I had not heard of before. It's spelled F-U-R-A-N-O-N-E-S. And the researchers thought that a combination of these furanones for the attractant was suggested as the cause. And the publication for that was Campbell and Long in 2008. Now, I didn't know what a furanone was, and so I looked it up on Wikipedia, and they pointed out this product called furanyl, and it's basically strawberry furanone. They define it as an organic compound. Organic just means it has carbon in it. That's used in the flavor and perfume industry. And it's formally a derivative of a product known as furan, F-U-R-A-N. That's white and it's colorless solid that is soluble. In other words, it dissolves in water and organic solvents. So I would think that if you did some research on finding this furanone, you probably can purchase it elsewhere. I have not looked for it online myself. So it's certainly something to think about. But I would just simply try with some strawberry flavoring, maybe some strawberry extracts, and see where that gets you. For those of you that may be struggling now, if you're having great success with corn and you're able to satisfy your clients, it may not be worth going into the research on this. But for those of you that may be in high pressure areas where maybe you're getting so many non-target animals in your traps that you need to try something different, then I would certainly suggest you explore this particular publication again and consider some of the techniques that are being offered here, and maybe try that strawberry extract. And so again, let me give you the title of the publication again. Reducing Non-Target Species Interference While Trapping Wild Pigs, published by Texas A&M. And the publication number, if you want that, is WF-030, and it was published in September of 2015. Well, I hope that was helpful for you. Again, I have no experience trapping feral pigs. We do not have them yet here in Montana. I've taken some classes on feral hog trapping. I'm hoping someday to get some trapping. If those of you that may be in feral pig country are interested in maybe inviting me down, maybe an opportunity for them to come down and visit you. I'd love to chat with you some more, and I think it'd be quite a thrill to do some feral pig trapping and get up close and personal with these guys, just to sort of add that to my list. But for those of you who are struggling to help your clients deal with feral pigs, God bless you. We need more of you folks to get out there and help the public deal with these feral pigs, and let's make sure we're whacking these guys and get the word out. We need to eradicate these animals from the landscape. I am not one of those people that think it's impossible. I think it's just that we lack the will to do it. It's certainly going to be hard, but there's been some interesting success that occurred where they've been eradicating feral pigs in I think now 2 counties in Texas. So if Texas can at least start the process, that tells you that certainly things are possible, and we need to do this as professionals to help our native species and also protect the landscape, because there's some serious diseases that can be spread with this particular animal on the landscape. Well, I'm Stephen Vantassel. You've been listening to Living the Wildlife podcast. I do want you to take a few moments, if you would, to subscribe to the channel. Definitely join us on Facebook. We'd love to have you in terms of our Pest Geek podcast family. Love to have you along with that. And again, if you have questions or comments, suggestions, perhaps you'd like to be on the show, definitely reach out to me. I'm at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Hope you've enjoyed the show. And again, this is Living the Wildlife. Why do we call it Living the Wildlife? Because we want you to live the wildlife, not be the wildlife. Take care, everybody.